When I look at a man in his early 50s making more money than he has ever made in his life, owning a home, taking family vacations, keeping the children in good schools, and carrying himself like a man who did what he was supposed to do, I do not automatically see security. Very often I see the most financially dangerous stage of his life. That sounds backward to most people. They think danger belongs to the broke man, the reckless man, the young man who has not found his footing. But I have watched money for a long time, and one lesson keeps repeating itself. The greatest mistakes are often made by people who look successful while they are making them. Looking fine is one of the costliest conditions in finance because it delays honesty. A person who is visibly failing gets forced into correction. A person who looks stable can keep digging the hole for years. The average 53-year-old American man has about $87,000 saved for retirement. The median man his age has less. At exactly the point when many men assume the hard part is behind them, the actual math says something else. It says the decade that ought to convert earning power into freedom is often the decade that destroys freedom. Instead, I would put it even more plainly. A lot of men do not enter their 50s carrying one big mistake. They enter carrying a chain of polished achievements that behave like liabilities. They do not feel like liabilities because each one arrived disguised as proof that life was working. The house was proof. The better neighborhood was proof. The second car was proof. The tuition was proof. The club membership was proof. The vacations were proof. The professional identity was proof. And the trouble with proof is that once a man uses it to build his self-image, he becomes very reluctant to question the carrying cost. I have a phrase for this because I think people remember pictures better than spreadsheets. Many men in their 50s are living under golden anchors. An anchor is supposed to give you stability. A golden one looks even better because other people admire it while you are dragging it. That is the seduction. The mortgage on the expensive house can be a golden anchor. The car lease can be a golden anchor. The country club dues can be a golden anchor. The private school bill can be a golden anchor. The fixed monthly obligations a family signs up for over 25 years can become a whole chain of golden anchors welded together. In calm water, those anchors do not feel dangerous. They feel deserved. Then the tide changes. The market drops the year you plan to retire. The company decides your division is no longer essential. Your parents need care. Your child needs tuition money you did not fully prepare for. A health issue shows up. A marriage that looked intact from the outside goes through legal division. When your judgment is weakest and your expenses are highest. At that moment, the polished things that used to signal stability do not save you. They hold you in place while the water rises. The men who finish with options are rarely the men who collected the most impressive anchors. More often, they are the ones who learned to cut them loose while everyone around them was still admiring the shine. I have spent most of my life around people who talk about wealth, and I can tell you that one of the most misunderstood words in personal finance is affordability. Most people ask a monthly question and think they are asking a wealth question. They ask, can I afford this payment? What they should ask is, what future have I just agreed to buy instead of the one I could have owned? If a household puts $3,000 a month into car payments, the bank statement will record the same outflow as if that household had put $3,000 a month into retirement assets. The statement does not tell you which one improved your future and which one consumed it. The math does. Cash leaving the account is not the same thing as wealth being built. I think that is where the trouble begins for many capable men somewhere around 46 or 47. In their 30s and early 40s, they are often hunting. They are trying to build, they are still thinking in terms of upside. Then a psychological shift happens. Ambition starts turning into protection. The man says he is no longer trying to win. He is trying not to lose. On the surface, that sounds mature. In practice, it often means he begins protecting the appearance of wealth instead of wealth itself. The appearance of wealth charges rent every month. That rent does not always arrive dramatically. It comes as a stack of individually reasonable decisions. The bigger mortgage because rates were good at the time, the nicer car because the old one did not match the career anymore, the extra property because it might become an investment, the private school because changing course later would disrupt the children, the membership because networking matters, the recurring services because time is scarce and the man is exhausted. Every decision passes the same simple test. It seems affordable. Then 20 years later, the man discovers he did not build a base. He built a burn rate. I want to make this concrete because abstractions allow people to hide. Take a man I will call Richard. He is 51. He earns $190,000 a year. That is more than his father ever made and more than he once imagined he would make. By ordinary standards, he has done well. But his monthly mortgage payment with taxes and insurance is about $4,200. He leases a BMW for $750 a month because after 2 decades of work, he believes he earned the right to enjoy it. He owns a boat he uses only a handful of times a year, yet it still costs him financing plus storage. He pays country club dues. He has 2 children in private high school at $22,000 each per year. Before Richard buys groceries, before he pays for gasoline, before he does anything discretionary at all, he has committed himself to roughly $12,500 a month of obligations that are hard to reverse. After taxes, his take-home pay is roughly $10,600 per month. That means Richard is underwater before his week even starts. He is not reckless. He is not stupid. He is the product of 25 years of saying yes to things that looked individually sensible without ever stopping to add the whole column. That is what traps people. The danger is not usually one insane choice. It is the accumulation of respectable choices that were never tested against each other. You would be surprised how often the real issue is not that a man does not earn enough. The real issue is that his burn rate has grown faster than his savings rate for 15 years in a row. His income doubled. His wealth did not. Those are not the same achievement. This is why high earners can feel nearly as stressed as people making far less. The ratchet clicks. Lifestyle expands to meet income. The track simply becomes more expensive. The runner still feels the strain. A household making more than $200,000 can report stress that looks strangely similar to households making far less because both are trapped inside monthly commitments that took shape silently over time. One modest luxury can cost more than it appears to cost. Put $800 a month into a low-cost index fund at 7% instead of directing it toward one more status expense from age 40 to 65. And you are talking about roughly $472,000. That is not from finding a hot stock. That is from not buying one extra anchor. People like to think the retirement problem is mostly about total savings. Total savings matter, but there is another danger that becomes lethal precisely in the 50s because it interacts with timing. A man can save diligently and still get damaged if he never understands what happens when returns arrive in the wrong order. Sequence of returns risk sounds academic, but it is vicious in real life. Imagine a man at 58 with $450,000 in his retirement account. He intends to retire at 63. If the market averages 7% per year over the next 5 years, he reaches retirement with something like $630,000. On paper, it looks orderly. He can picture the line. It goes up at a decent slope and lands in a place he can live with. Now change only one thing. Let the market fall 35% in the first year of retirement. Then recover and average healthy returns after that. The long-term average can still look respectable when someone builds a neat presentation around it. But the retiree is no longer just compounding. He is withdrawing. He is selling shares while they are down. He is harvesting losses in the exact window where the portfolio most needed to remain intact. That can turn a 25-year retirement into a 14-year retirement, even though the average return across the whole period still seems acceptable to a casual observer. This is what people miss when they say, the market always comes back. The market may come back. Your money may not, because your money was being spent while the market was healing. That distinction matters more the older you get and the closer you are to dependence on the portfolio. I remember how many people discovered this the hard way after the financial crisis. Portfolios were cut deeply at exactly the moment retirees needed them most. Markets recovered over time. Some families never really did, because the losses had already been turned from temporary declines into permanent withdrawals. A man who does not model that risk is not planning retirement. He is rehearsing an average. Now, I want to bring in another kind of drag because it is smaller in appearance and enormous in outcome. Few things in finance are more dangerous than a cost that feels too tiny to notice each quarter, but compounds year after year. Consider a man named Gary. He is 54. He has $600,000 under management with a major wealth firm. He trusts the process because he gets reports, charts, commentary, and all the ritual signs that someone serious is in charge. His annual advisory fee is 1.2%. That sounds harmless because it is quoted in a way designed to feel harmless. But 1.2% on $600,000 is $7,200 a year. Compare that with a broad market index approach that costs only a few basis points. Stretch that difference over 15 years while the portfolio compounds at a normal rate and the gap is not cosmetic anymore. You are now talking about something on the order of $182,000 quietly moving from Gary's future into someone else's revenue stream. People hear that and still shrug because fees are often stated as basis points, and basis points do not trigger emotion. Dollars do, $182,000 is not a footnote. For many families, that is the difference between strain and breathing room. That is the difference between retiring with some flexibility and retiring with dread. The fee problem gets worse when the arrangement also keeps a man from implementing tax moves that would improve his own future but reduce the portion of assets someone else gets paid to oversee. Gary's advisor knows what Roth conversions are. Gary's advisor knows there are years in life when moving money strategically can reduce future tax pain by tens of thousands of dollars. Yet the structure does not always reward that kind of advice. I do not say that to accuse every advisor of bad faith. I say it because incentives matter. In every business, including finance, you have to ask who is paid more when you do nothing. Most people are willing to inspect a business model before they buy a stock. They should be equally willing to inspect the business model attached to the advice guiding their own family. But even that is not the full picture. The hardest part of a man's 50s is that several unrelated pressure points often arrive together. A decent plan can survive one shock. It can survive maybe two if the household is flexible. What breaks people is concurrency. Aging parents are one pressure point. Adult children launching into expensive higher education are another. Late divorce is a third. Career instability or health interruption can sit on top of them. Many plans are built as if those problems will politely take turns. Life is rarely that courteous. Start with parents. A large number of men begin providing financial support to aging parents right around the same period when they are supposed to be accelerating retirement savings. The older generation often undersaved. People are living longer. Medical and care needs rise sharply in the late 70s and 80s. Medicare is real help for some kinds of medical expense, but it does not magically absorb the cost of assisted living or memory care. A bill of $5,000 to $7,000 per month is not unusual. If a parent has only $70,000 or $85,000 set aside, the runway is short. That means what looked like your parents' retirement problem becomes your monthly obligation. In Gary's case, his mother needed memory care. The cost was $6,200 per month. She had $85,000 saved. He ended up covering about $3,000 a month on top of everything else in his life. That is another anchor, and it arrives without asking whether this is a convenient time for you. Then come the children. People often think they finished paying for the children once they got through the expensive years of raising them. In many upper-middle-class households, launching adult children has become a second-long bill. A private university can run around $62,000 per year, once tuition, room, board, and fees are included. Put 2 children into that pipeline near the same time, and a family can be staring at roughly $400,000 of post-tax spending over several years, if the saving was not done early and consistently. When families do not have that cash ready, they cover the gap from current income, home equity, or retirement assets. None of those sources are painless. They only feel painless at the start. And then there is the event many people do not want to price because it feels too personal and too unpleasant. Great divorce is one of the largest financial destroyers of late middle age. When divorce comes after 50, the problem is not dividing what you have just begun to build. The problem is dividing everything you spent your entire adult life building. Retirement accounts get split. Home equity is subjected to legal process. Support obligations can persist. Judgment is impaired by stress. The timing is awful because you do not have the same amount of runway left to rebuild. The documented loss in net worth for men after a late divorce can be catastrophic. People talk about divorce emotionally. They should also talk about it mathematically. Let Gary carry all of this for a moment because his case is painfully ordinary. He has the advisory fee drag. He has sequence risk that was never seriously stress tested. He is helping cover his mother's care. His eldest child is about to start college. And he is separated, moving toward a financial split that will cut a large portion of what he thought was his retirement base in half. This is not sensational. It is accounting. That is why I say many men in their 50s are not undone by recklessness. They are undone by reasonable decisions that were never modeled together. The average quarterly review is not built to say, you have 6 separate cash drains developing at once. Your burn rate is too high. Your fee structure is eating compounding, and your retirement timing is exposed to bad sequence. That conversation is uncomfortable. It threatens the story the client wants to hear, and sometimes threatens the revenue model of the institution providing the reassurance. There is another anchor that deserves attention because it hides inside identity. By 50, many men are known as something. They are the managing director, the founder, the builder, the rainmaker, the expert everyone calls. That identity took effort to create. It may have produced real money. It certainly produced social weight, but maintaining social weight is costly. The neighborhood signals it, the car signals it, the watch signals it, the school signals it, the vacations signal it, the club signals it. None of those expenses arrive with a document explaining their 20-year compound cost. Status charges management fees too. It just invoices in a different format. I have seen this most clearly when 2 men with similar incomes walk through their 40s and 50s in different ways. One man, call him Paul, keeps what I think of as a prestige footprint. Correct suburb, correct car, correct schools, country club, family travel that keeps the image intact. He looks successful in the common social sense, yet by his early 50s he is leaning on home equity just to close the gap between income and lifestyle. His retirement accounts are mediocre relative to earnings. His liquid net worth is thin. Much of what people admire about him cannot actually replace income. Another man, Marcus, earns about the same amount but makes quieter choices. He buys a used car and owns it outright. He lives in a good district, not the district that exists mostly to broadcast status. He travels, but not every year in the most impressive way. He maxes the retirement accounts, adds catch-up contributions, and invests regularly in a simple low-cost portfolio. By 52, the difference in liquid wealth between Marcus and Paul is not subtle. It is the difference between being trapped by income and being able to negotiate with life. Same decade, same broad market. Similar earnings, completely different options. That is what I want people to understand. Money is not just spending power. It is option value. A man with high income and low option value is in a more fragile position than a man with slightly lower income and high option value. One can walk away from a bad job. One can absorb a health interruption. One can help a parent without destroying the family balance. One can retire before the body or the company makes the decision for him. The other man may look richer from the curb, but he is actually living under a stricter set of conditions. Most of the great financial pain I have watched has come from confusing display with flexibility. If you really want to see the power of this, look at two men making $180,000 per year. One lives with fixed obligations of around $11,000 per month before discretionary spending. After taxes, take-home pay might be only about $9,800 a month. He is in deficit before life begins. He may patch that deficit with credit, with asset sales, with home equity, or by simply failing to save. 15 years later, he may have accumulated little or almost nothing relative to what his income should have allowed. The other man lives with a $6,000 monthly floor and directs roughly $3,800 per month toward investment. Over 15 years at a reasonable rate of return, he can build something like $1.14 million. Same income. What changed was not genius. What changed was the first man reaches retirement with Social Security plus scraps. The second man reaches retirement with Social Security plus the earnings power of a meaningful pool of capital. The first man experiences every economic headline as a threat. The second man can look at the same world with a degree of calm because his position has margin. People spend endless hours discussing the market, taxes, inflation, the Federal Reserve, international events, and all the other loud subjects. Those things matter, but for many households, the signal is burn rate and everything else is noise layered on top of it. A man whose lifestyle requires $11,000 a month cannot solve that with optimism. He cannot solve it with motivational language. He cannot solve it by believing he deserves the life he has built. He solves it by reducing the fixed cost of staying still. That is not glamorous advice. It is survival advice. When I say cut the anchor, I do not mean become miserable. I do not mean reject every pleasure or live as if life is only a spreadsheet. I mean identify which expenses are buying image instead of freedom and start making adult choices while time still exists, because time is still the great ally if you have not wasted all of it. Between the early 50s and the early 60s, a man may still have a decade or more in which disciplined saving, lower fees, tax-intelligent moves, and a sharply reduced burn rate can change the outcome. But the window is smaller than people think, and pretending otherwise is expensive. Let me come back to Gary because his case contains both the damage and the remedy. After his separation, the settlement cut his investable assets from $600,000 to around $290,000. That is a brutal reduction at 55. He lost the house. He had only about 12 years left to close an enormous gap between what he had and what his previous lifestyle implied he would need. At that point, fantasy was no longer useful, so he moved to a smaller apartment. He brought his monthly fixed obligations from roughly $9,500 down to around $4,100. He shifted away from the high-fee advisory structure into a simple three-fund Vanguard-style portfolio with an expense ratio of only a few basis points. He started converting around $40,000 a year from traditional retirement money to Roth space, while his tax bracket was temporarily lower. Will that magically let him retire at 62? Probably not. Could it keep him from going under and give him a real shot at retiring later with dignity? Yes, that is what honest financial repair looks like. It does not usually feel triumphant in the beginning. It feels like downsizing, swallowing pride, explaining choices, disappointing your old self-image, and becoming very serious about math. But the men who survive financially are not always the men who avoid pain. Very often, they are the men who accept smaller pain early to avoid catastrophic pain later. I have noticed that people are willing to work extraordinarily hard for status, but strangely unwilling to do the emotional work required to let status go. They will put in 60-hour weeks to preserve a neighborhood they barely enjoy. They will continue driving a payment they resent. They will fund rituals of appearance long after the rituals stop making anyone genuinely happy. They tell themselves they are protecting the family, but in many cases they are protecting the social interpretation of the family. That is not the same thing. The hardest sentence in this whole subject may be this one. Many achievements become liabilities before their owners are psychologically ready to relabel them. A house can become too much house. A car can become too much car. A membership can become dead weight. Tuition can remain worth it or become unbearable depending on what it has crowded out. A financial advisor can be useful or overpriced. A retirement target can be realistic or an average return fantasy. None of those judgments can be made by pride. They must be made by arithmetic. Arithmetic is one of the few incorruptible partners in life. It does not care how hard you worked. It does not care how respected you are. It does not care whether your neighbors envy you. It does not care whether your old decisions felt justified at the time. It only records what leaves the account, what remains invested, what compounds, and what was spent on signaling instead of ownership. That is why low-cost, boring, persistent investing has built more durable fortunes than excitement ever did. A simple index approach with automatic contributions and very low fees is dull enough to embarrass people at dinner parties. But it works because it leaves compounding alone. The man who always needs to feel clever usually interrupts the process. The man who learns to become boring in the right places often becomes wealthy. The same logic applies to the rest of life. Cutting a recurring expense is boring. Refusing a prestige purchase is boring. Auditing every fee is boring. Stress testing retirement against a bad first 2 years is boring. Running the real burn rate instead of the aspirational burn rate is boring. Declining to finance identity through debt is boring. None of it makes a dramatic story in the moment. But after 15 years, the dull man with options is living a much better story than the impressive man with obligations. If I were speaking privately to a man in his early 50s who wanted the truth, instead of comfort, I would tell him to do 3 things almost immediately. I would tell him to calculate the monthly floor of his life with absolute honesty. Not the number he prefers, the number the world actually charges him to stand still. Mortgage or rent, vehicle payments, insurance, tuition, dues, minimum debt service, recurring support for relatives, subscriptions and services that are functionally fixed because no one in the household has the discipline to remove them. Add the whole stack. If that number is swallowing the majority of take-home pay, the issue is not discipline. The issue is structure. I would tell him to stop pretending an average market return is a plan. He should model what happens if the market falls hard near retirement and recoveries come later than hoped. He should ask what his withdrawals, expenses, and taxes look like under strain, not under polite assumptions. A plan that survives only on a smooth upward line is not a plan, and I would tell him to inspect every fee in his financial life as if he were considering buying the business that charges it. Advisory fees, fund expenses, insurance loads, hidden drags embedded in products people barely understand. Once a man sees what 1% means over a decade or more, he will stop calling it small. Most men do not fail because they never heard a rule. They fail because they delay contact with the full picture until compounding time has been consumed by lifestyle commitments. The window from 50 to 62 is not enormous, but it is large enough to matter. That is the hopeful part, not hopeful in the sentimental sense. Hopeful in the mathematical sense. A man can still change the end of his story if he is willing to become less decorative and more liquid. He can still exchange identity expenses for investment assets. He can still trade polished anchors for flexibility. He can still move from being a high earner with no room to being a quieter owner with real room, he can still choose to build a retirement that is funded by capital instead of faith. And that, in my view, is the real dividing line. The men who arrive at 60 with options are usually not the ones who look the most successful at 52. They are the ones who faced the ugly arithmetic sooner. They measured the burn rate. They admitted what the status expenses were costing them. They accepted that a sequence shock near retirement could wreck an average-based fantasy. They stripped away needless fees. They stopped financing a public image and started funding a private future. They cut the anchors. Most men do not. Most men keep polishing them because each anchor once felt like a trophy. Then one day the water rises and they discover that what looked like proof of success was really just weight. If you understand that early enough, you can still do something very powerful. You can stop spending your best remaining decade defending a lifestyle that cannot carry you. You can start using it to buy freedom.